Welcome to tutorial 8 about CrusherX. I'm going to talk about the parameters length and birth and their interactions with each other as well as with the content of the grains. The very basics are quickly explained. With CrusherX you cut a live sound or a sound in the buffer into pieces called grains. The shortest grain CrusherX is able to cut off from the sound is 1 millisecond. The longest is 1 minute. The length parameter has a range from 1 to 60,000 milliseconds. When cutting off shorter and shorter grains, you reach a border of length where the grain's content, the frequency of the sound, is not noticeable anymore and the grain occurs only as a simple click. But even those very short click-like grains are of great musical importance when combined with the parameter called birth. Birth determines how often CrusherX cuts a grain off from the sound, and again the range of the birth parameter reaches from 1 millisecond up to a whole minute. When the birth parameter is shorter than the length, the next grain will be already generated while the last one hasn't reached its end yet and is still producing sound. When the birth and the length parameters are adjusted to exactly the same value, one grain ends exactly when the next grain is generated. You will hear a continuing sound with clicks when a grain ends and the next begins. And at least when birth is longer than the length of the grains, there will be an interruption of the sound, a gap between the individual grains. But as you will see and hear later in this video, even those gaps can be interesting as the frequency of interruption can get into audible dimensions. Together with the number of generators, there will be a video about the generators later in this series, the parameters length and birth determine the so-called density of our composition. The term density means the number of active grains at a time. Some examples. 2 generators are active, length is 100 milliseconds and birth decreases from 117 to 22, increasing the density from 2 to 8. Next example. 2 generators are active, length is 200 milliseconds and birth decreases from 220 milliseconds to 12 milliseconds, increasing density from 2 to 20. Example 3. 2 generators are active, length is 50 milliseconds and birth decreases from 55 milliseconds to 5 milliseconds, increasing density from 2 220 again. You will have noticed that a higher density leads to a more continuous and smoother sound and a higher loudness. Especially the smoothing of a sound is important for extracting sound from a file in the buffer, as we did in video 7. But with a short grain length, less than 50 milliseconds, modulations occur, sometimes wanted, see and hear later in this video, sometimes unwanted. The higher the density, the more modulations. Once you have found a density you want to preserve, even if you change the length of the grains, you can fix the relation of length and birth by clicking the link LB button. Changing the length of the grains will automatically change the birth correspondingly. For example, doubling the length will double the birth automatically, and so on. But take care, you can still change birth without changing length, even with the link button activated. And something else, CrusherX sets the lower limit of birth to 10% of the grain's length, so that, for safety reasons, there will never be a number of active grains your PC and your ears can't handle anymore. Especially important with huge numbers of generators. Well, that's pretty much everything about the basics.